Hey everybody, and it's time to start my June wrap up. Now I'm starting it pretty late because I went on a trip in the beginning of the month, and so the weekend before and the weekend after I didn't really have much time to update you guys. So we are actually at just past the midpoint of the month. It's the 16th of June when I'm doing my first update, and actually that means that I have quite a lot of books to talk about for once. I have had a productive start of the month so far. So this month is the amazing Readathon month. Readathon that turns out to be quite stressful for me because I want to try and stick to my physical TBR as much as possible. But I've also been buying so many books this month that I'm actually making it myself easier to follow the rules, I guess. But so here we go. For the first book that I read this month, I'm actually not entirely sure anymore what this counted for, so I'll actually have to put my phone here somewhere. Shut up. So for the amazing Readathon, basically this is a Readathon in which you're kind of racing from one city to another. Every city gives you a prompt that you have to fulfill in order to continue on, and then you kind of have to decide as well what mode of transportation you use in order to gain more points, but then you only have a specific type of budget. So the first city that we hit was Toronto, which was, for that prompt you had to read a book that didn't cost you any money. So for that one I read Magma by Tora Hjortleifsdottir because this was a book that was gifted to me by Diana. Yes, just making sure, by Diana as a gift for the Christmas sort of like, what do you call that, Secret Santa that we do over on Jolene's Discord. This is a very short book, and also it doesn't have much on each page, so it's one that you can go through really quickly, but it is definitely a difficult one to some extent because it is dealing with a lot of triggers. So it's basically we're basically looking at a woman, and from her perspective we are following the story as she's together with this man, and there are a lot of red flags in their relationship. I don't think that there was any sort of like real physical violence that is documented on the page, but there are definitely certain implications of her not really daring to do all the things that she might want to do because he opposes, and that she is to some extent frightened of his potential reaction. And there are definitely degrading sex scenes, for example, being portrayed, and acts against her will, or times in which she doesn't want to have sex, in which he kind of forces himself on her, for example. So do be wary of that going into it. I do think it is a very powerful one, and with the way it is told, because it is such a short book, it definitely captures like exactly what it means to say in as little words as possible. And I tend to admire that in writing. I tend to admire more the sort of like economical prose that manages to say a lot with just a few words, compared to more sort of like flowery writing which uses a lot of words to say little. Cat, can you please shut up? Then I went for a graphic novel which I used to sightsee. This is Breeders by Justin Madsen. This is a sci-fi graphic novel in which basically, due to an environmental disaster, people can no longer breathe the outside air, so they need these sort of like masks in order to protect themselves from the outside air. We're following multiple characters within this one. This definitely feels a little sort of like noir because it's definitely more sort of like on the darker side of things, the bleak side of things, and I enjoyed it, but at this point in time I cannot even really tell you anymore what the sort of like plot behind this was. And yeah, this is one that I use for sightseeing because it has every single vowel on the cover if you take into account the name of the author. So that got me 500 points for the amazing Readathon. For the second leg of our journey, we then went to Buenos Aires, for which I read Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. This is the third of the Secret Project books that Brandon Sanderson came out with last year. Shut up. This is my favorite so far of the Secret Project books, and it's definitely one that worked well for me again. So this is one in which we're following two POVs, which was a prompt, a dual POV. There is like one or two chapters here and there which go from a third POV, but like if 90% of it is dual POV, you could count it. And so this is a book in which we're following two characters who are basically seem to be inhabiting very different worlds from one another. One is basically sort of like religious figure who has been trained to kind of stack rocks in order to call spirits to her, and then spirits kind of help the town out. And then the other is a nightmare painter who basically uses the art of painting to scare off nightmares that are trying to invade the town. And through circumstances, they kind of end up body swapping. So at one point in time, he will be inhabiting her body, where she is just a ghost hovering around giving instructions. And then if he in that body falls asleep or loses consciousness, then they move over to his side of the world, where she all of a sudden has a body and has agency. I really enjoyed this one. I really enjoyed the world building behind it, and I really enjoyed the plot. This is one that worked very well for me. The only thing that didn't really work for me is the narrator of this book. I feel like it was not as bad as this could have been, but there are definitely moments in time in which the narrator is quite prominent here, and those are the moments I didn't enjoy. Those are the moments in which I was just like, why include this? Why do you put this comment out there? I have forgotten the specific examples of what I didn't like about them, but definitely I didn't like them. They're definitely just like too obvious and out there, and they didn't serve anything. And because they were just there from time to time, it was just like, why even include them? You know, I understand why, but I would have preferred for them to not be there, and for that entire aspect of the book to have just been left out, because it really didn't serve me, and it was actually just going against my enjoyment of the book. But so yeah, this one was another Brandon Sanderson that worked for me, so we are back on a positive note with one of his books, because for those who've been around on my channel for a while, you know that recently I have not been having great success with Brandon Sanderson. Moving on to leg 3 of the journey, we had to travel to Berlin, for which the prompt was to read a book with movement in the title. And I will say that this book does not have movement in the title, but at one point in time they clarified that if you can say I can and then put a word of the title there, then it counts. And so I chose Ink, Blood, Sister, Scribe, because I can ink and I can scribe. Okay, I know it does not seem to count all that much, but I just needed to be able to count this book, okay, because this is a book that I was reading, and yeah, this is how we're serving ourselves this month as well. Ink, Blood, Sister, Scribe is a fantasy debut, I believe, by Emma Torsch. This is a book in which we're following two sisters at the beginning. There's a third character that I'll talk about later. They grew up in the same household. One of them hears the magic of the books that her father is collecting in his library. The other one doesn't. And at the age of 18, the sister who didn't hear any of the magic kind of disappeared from their lives. She moved out, and every single year she's kind of moving places. And from her perspective, we find out that this is because her father told her she had to help protect the library that they have at home. And they are protecting this magical collection from outside forces. The mother of the oldest daughter was killed because of these books, and so they know that there are people out there who would go to extreme measures to get hold of their magical books. And so the third perspective is actually somebody who is working in another institution, another library, where he is basically the only scribe known to mankind at this point in time, because scribes are extremely rare, and so he has dedicated his life and his blood to serving the library. However, the library is maybe not as kosher of an institution as he was led to believe from the get-go. I really enjoyed this one. This one works really, really well. I really enjoyed it. It has like twists and turns that I didn't really see coming. I could like barely predict it. I really enjoyed the perspectives that we were getting, the way in which it is told, the world building behind this one. Yeah, this one just worked really, really well. I don't have much to say about it. So in that perspective, I think it might be this type of book that kind of will disappear from my mind in a few months' time or anything like that. It's already to some extent kind of disappearing, but I will definitely say that it is one that really worked very well for me, and one that didn't feel like I didn't have that sort of feeling like, oh, been there, done that, this is just like a type of fantasy that I've read over and over again. No, this definitely felt like its own thing, and I really enjoyed it for that reason. Moving on to the book that I actually just finished a few minutes ago, but that in this whole amazing readathon story is the next one that we're going to be mentioning, and that is the next leg of the journey, which is the Paris leg, for which we had to read a book that has won a prize. This is kind of reinterpreting the prompt to some extent, I guess. This is the best debut of the year as voted on by The Observer. So this is Mrs. S by Kate Patrick, which is a queer book. By the way, Inkblot Sister Scribe also has a queer relationship within it, so love reading some queer books in the month of June as well. And so Mrs. S by Kate Patrick is super queer. You know, this is a book about lesbian lust, and that is basically the entire premise, let's say. We are looking at a sort of boarding school. Don't actually even know whether it's in like the UK or whether it's in America. We are following a woman who is basically a sort of matron there, so her role is kind of helping out everybody else within the school. If somebody needs assistance, they will call to her to help her out, and she ends up being attracted to the wife of the how do you call that, the owner of the school, and so this entire book is about lesbian lust. There is also some explicit lesbian scenes. There are multiple lesbian characters within this one as well. So whereas this sort of like boarding school setting initially made me think that it was like very much in the past, throughout the reading of the book it turned out to be much more modern. Like, lesbianism is something that you can come out with, you can say that you are lesbian, so definitely placing it much more modern than I originally thought it was. And there is a reference to like a song from Mary Poppins the musical, so it definitely is like very recent, so it definitely is relatively recent, past few decades, and yeah, I will say that for me this just is like a 3.5 star, because this, yeah, I don't know, sometimes this works very well for me. This is like a book without a plot, more almost, it's all vibes, and there's not really a story pushing you through this, which sometimes can work really, really well for me, but in this case it worked well for me, but it's just like, as a consequence, it just stays there, it just lingers around the same sort of like level. But I will say that I definitely enjoyed the lesbian representation, and the way in which it talks about lesbian lust and all of those scenes was just really refreshing to read, to see. And so yeah, definitely an ideal book for the month of June. The final book for the amazing readathon that I've read so far in terms of the city legs is Persuasion by Jane Austen. This is a impromptu reread that I started this month, and so Persuasion is my favorite Jane Austen. Not entirely sure of that anymore, because rereading it I did definitely feel like towards the end it kind of like lost my interest, and it definitely differs quite a lot from the movie version that I prefer, and I had kind of forgotten that, because this is definitely a reread of Persuasion. I have read it before, but I do also really love these characters and love the story of Persuasion, and my preference for Persuasion comes from the fact that the character of Anne Elliot is a character that feels much more close to me, a character who kind of puts others in front of herself, a character who is kind of self-effacing at times, and whereas that is the type of heroine that we don't really focus a lot of stories on anymore nowadays. We love our sort of like strong women who have a lot of sort of like character and who are willing to stand up for themselves and stuff like that, and that is definitely great. But I also like a character like Anne Elliot who kind of puts herself in the background much more, and I love seeing that as a protagonist within this book. Plus I also really like a second chance romance, which is what Persuasion is. So this was to read a book with nature on the cover, and that is definitely the case with this beautiful edition that I got recently. And then the final thing that I've read so far this month is the Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. This is another graphic novel, and this is just like the cutest thing ever. This is basically a blacksmith's apprentice who runs into this guy at a tea shop who basically has these dragons that grow tea leaves, and then if you drink those tea leaves, then you share the memories of the person who is the owner of that dragon. And she gets interested in learning about this art, and so this is kind of what we're going through here. So this is a cozy fantasy. It's a very short one, the first one. Second one is a little bit longer. I will hopefully still be reading that this weekend as well. But so yeah, this was just all coziness. It was just like the cutest thing ever. But so yeah, that's how far I've gotten in my reading so far this month. This also is one that got me 500 points for Amazing Readathon, because this is a book that the host of Amazing Readathon gave 5 stars to. So I have finished a few books since the last time I spoke to you guys. I'm hoping that I talked about all of the books that I wanted to talk about, but I'm not entirely sure anymore which I updated you guys about. But so about a week ago, like last weekend, I snuck in the Tea Dragon Festival into my reading. So this is the sequel to the Tea Dragon Society. We are following a different main character, but there are some overlapping characters, and of course the same concept is there of like dragons that if you brew their tea leaves, like they have magical proportions. I really enjoyed this one, wholesome, cute, like the previous one. This one also has sign language incorporated into it, which is also like lovely for the representation for that one. So yeah, these are just like cute, wholesome. There's really not that much more that I can say about them, which is not the case for the next one, which I hope I will be doing justice in my review here, but that is The Liar's Knot by Emmy Carrick. So this is the second book in the Rook and Rose trilogy, which is a series co-written by Marie Brennan and Alice, forgotten her last name. Alice Helms, and this is a series that deals with a con artist who's basically trying to swindle her way into a rich family, not really realizing that the family is also on the brink of destruction. There are a few main characters that we're following throughout the series, and each of them have kind of their own goals, their own motivations, and it's, especially in the first one, interesting to see them sort of like clash and coincide, kind of see how they can help one another out, but also seeing how their different motivations might make them run into one another and bump into their be like obstacles to one another's accomplishments. And the second one was just like the first one I really enjoyed, and the second one I also really enjoyed. This is a 5-star read. I'm not entirely sure anymore whether I gave the first one 5 stars, but it should have. So I really enjoyed this series a whole lot, and I just grew to love these characters even more in the second book. Like they are just the best characters. There's just so much depth, in my opinion, to these characters. They are also just like, you know, beautiful messes, you know. They are characters who definitely make mistakes and who say stuff that they don't really should be saying, that they say because they're just like hurting and lashing out, but you cannot help but feel for them, root for them, love them. And you know, I've grown so attached to some of these characters and the interactions between these characters that I am just hopeful that the third one won't break my heart, because you know, in a fantasy series there's always a huge potential for heartbreak, and if anything happens to either one of my favorite characters, which is almost every single character in the book at this point in time, then potentially that's going to cause a lot of heartbreak. But so this is a really interesting series. It is queer normative, as in there are characters in here who are in same-sex relationships, and same-sex relationships are also considered to be normal. This is also kind of built into the way in which, you know, inheritance and stuff like that works within this world, because basically this works with a sort of like family register, but the family register isn't just bound by blood ties. It is also like you can be written into a family register, and the beginning of this book actually sees quite a lot of people being added to a family register, because this family kind of is like low on members at that point in time, so they kind of need to look for new family members. So people from totally different blood bonds can become part of the new family register, which I find a very interesting and find a very interesting element to add into the world building. But it also adds an interesting new dynamic, because it means that, you know, alliances can become family ties. You know, if you have a really strong alliance with somebody, then you can kind of add them to your family register over time, so that adds like a new interesting dynamic to that whole sort of idea of inheritance. Whereas in other series, maybe like if somebody's from a different family, they will always just have like the ties to their own family and to their own family name that kind of clashes with their hopes of, you know, like building a bond with somebody else. But here you can actually like see people cross over into a new register, and yeah, I really enjoyed that one. I really enjoy the dynamics of our three main characters, as I indicated. These are just such lovable characters. There's a cat in this one. Yeah, I mean, I love everything about it, and I'm not making much sense in my talking about this series. The one thing I will probably say is like what I see most people steer clear from with the series is the fact that it has like a less rigid magic system, because there are sort of like two, maybe more, but there are, especially in the first one, I think you are mainly introduced to sort of like two magical elements. That's the numinatria, which is sort of like, let's say, an inscribed symbol that can kind of fulfill a certain goal, and then there are pattern, and pattern is sort of like a tarot card type magic. It basically is reading somebody's fate, and it's very much more intuitive, of course, as tarot is, and so a lot of people kind of steer clear from the series because you don't really know much about magic, and so it seems like anything is possible because you don't really find out much about the constraints and limitations of this magic system. And I do feel like that remains somewhat of the case in the second book, but I do think that there is more here that kind of goes into finding out more about the magic systems. There are characters who are very much interested in figuring out the link between numinatria and pattern, for example. There is more that we learn about the magic within this one, and if you are somebody who likes delving into magic systems, then maybe this one also offers some answers. But because that is not what I go into, I love a unique magic system, but I don't need to understand the magic system. So there are passages in this in which my mind is just like not trying to understand, which for somebody who is looking for those answers, perhaps this would be like, it would be interesting to see what somebody who has those objections for book one, what they would feel about after reading book two, because that's just really not how my brain, like that's not what I'm looking for in a fantasy. And so as a consequence, all I can say is that I felt like there was a lot more delving into the magic system within this one, but I cannot like promise that all of the reservations that people have about the magic system in book one are resolved within book two, for example. But there's definitely a lot more being explored there when it comes to magic. And then after that 5-star experience, oh yeah, by the way, I should indicate that this one I read for the Antananarivo, I think is the name, but I'm not entirely sure. Antananarivo, the capital of Madagascar, leg for the amazing readathon, to read a book that has religion in it. So this whole sort of idea that, you know, this is a society where you have the sort of native population of this town worshipped a set of gods, let's refer to them as, and then they had like sort of like a different culture kind of come in, take over, become the new dominant culture, who kind of built off their religion to kind of make a new sort of pantheon that is reduced in the amount of gods involved in it. And then there's also another element that comes into play within this one that we could also see as an interpretation of the gods sort of prompts. So going from that 5-star read to a book that I really struggled with, and I gotta say, if it weren't for the audiobook I wouldn't even have gone through it, and that is The Sun and the Void by Gabriela Romero La Cruz. This is a Lumicrate edition, so it's a really stunning edition, but this book just really didn't work for me. Like, I will admit that I went into it with a lot of apprehension, because I knew that Sarah and Scylla from the of Queens, Witches and Valkyries Discord did not enjoy it, so I was already apprehensive going into it. But I will also say that I don't think that it necessarily had a huge impact on my experience. I was just really finding it difficult to make sense of this book, or to kind of like, it was just like in one ear out the other, or like in one eye out the other, I guess, because for the first sort of like 100 pages I read this book with my eyeballs, and I just couldn't I couldn't keep track of the characters, like even the two main characters, I was just constantly forgetting which one was which, what their circumstances were, their backgrounds, and like there's a huge prevalence of one character over the other as well, which I also didn't really enjoy, especially since I enjoyed the one that we read less from the more, and then it was just like I couldn't keep, like the world building wasn't sticking with me, none of the circumstances were sticking with me, I was not really interested in the story. And then I switched to the audiobook because in the end I was like, yeah, I could DNF it because it is clearly not grabbing my attention, but I also like, I paid quite a bit for this one. I don't just want to give up on it, I want to see it through. So I paid for the audiobook then, and with that one I was able to finish it, and I will say like it wasn't a horrible experience, or it didn't, like I didn't suffer with the audiobook or anything like that, but I still don't feel like this is the book for me, like this much for me. This is another example, as I had last month with the Unbroken, of characters just making dumb decisions all of the time. And whereas with the Unbroken, I understand their motivations. They're just the dumb choice to make, but I understand why they're making them, and I do feel like there's a lot of interesting stuff being told there about colonialism, for example. With this one, I didn't have that same feeling. I felt like they were dumb choices, and I didn't always understand them. And, you know, they were horrible characters a lot of the time. Even when it came to the one character that I enjoyed the most, towards the end, there's one scene in which she kind of makes a decision that I just really couldn't stand behind, especially because it was kind of like, it was a pretty impactful decision that she was gonna make, and she was kind of making it more as sort of like a, ooh, let's see if I can do it, and that would be like a really fun thing to experiment with, whereas it's an experiment that involves somebody else, and that somebody else will like not have control over this, so this is something not to be taken lightly, which she was totally taking lightly, and then it totally blew up in her face as well. So I was like, okay, let's scratch this character off of my off of my list of characters that I can stand with in this book. And then there was a character that was like, we were made to hate for like the first half of the book, and then all of a sudden I was starting to feel like, wait, are we actually, is the author steering us in the direction where we're supposed to start to care about this character and see this character as being a character worth redeeming? And then it was indeed her intention to redeem this character, whereas I was like, yeah, but there are also still so many horrible, questionable things with this character, so like I'm not just willing to forgive and forget. And then another character who has been put through like horrible circumstances throughout the book, and then she seems to be just like willing to forgive the person who put her in these circumstances for no reason except for like what, attraction. So like there were many cases in this book in which I was just like, why? I don't understand your motivations, I don't agree with your motivations. Like either some of them were just like, oh okay, apparently you were just naive, because for some characters I thought that they understood the implications from the very beginning. I mean, I didn't even think there were implications, I thought it was like clear, but apparently it was not clear, and the character didn't realize how far she was going to have to take things. But even then I was like, okay, sure, like, so you're just extremely naive, fine. But like, yeah, there's just so many things with this book that didn't end up for me. So my rating of 2 stars is potentially like a little bit too harsh, because like, did this book, like, did I suffer, did I like have to crawl my way through the pages? No, but only because I had the audiobook. Because when I was reading physically, I absolutely had to crawl my way through them, and I was just like, my mind was just like unwilling to focus on it. So I will be trying to sell this edition of The Sun and the Void to get some of the word from this book back, because unfortunately this one didn't work for me, and so I will definitely not be continuing on with the series. I did like the fact that, you know, it has some of that, like it's Venezuelan inspired, so it has some of that cultural background. You can definitely see, I definitely had also a little bit of that feeling of, you know, like a Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Why am I all of a sudden doubting that is his name? Gabriel Garcia Marquez, yeah, that is his name, right? I have a little bit of that feeling of like, you know, the whole a way of talking about the history of this world and the family relationships and stuff like that. That definitely did give me some of that Marquez vibes, even though that is Colombian. But and so in principle I like that type of world building, but it just needs different characters and a different plot, I guess, because yeah, none of it really worked for me. And so that one I read for the soul leg of the Amazing Readathon, for which we had to read a book with a source of light on the cover. And so this one had a sun and a moon on the cover. It would have definitely been okay for the religion prompt, which is also something I really disliked in this book, but that was intentional, of course, is that there's a lot of this sort of like prejudice interaction between the religion that is a stand-in for, you know, like Christianity versus the religion that, you know, comes from the native population, and so all of those opinions and all of that prejudice and the way that that was internalized I found annoying. What I also definitely found annoying was that there are multiple characters in this book who kind of steer clear from Christianity because, you know, that God is never there for them, and, you know, like the God, they pray to them and then that God doesn't answer their prayers, which like I find a little bit annoying just because I'm an atheist. So I'm like, yeah, okay, but like God doesn't have to solve all of your problems. So yeah, that just personally annoys me when there are characters who put all their faith in a deity and then also blame the deity when things go wrong, you know, like as if the deity is there to solve all of their problems, basically. But so, rant over. Let's keep on reading and hopefully come back to you guys soon with another update. So, we are the final weekend of the month. It is the 29th, so tomorrow is the last day in the month. So I need to get some reading done because in Amazing Readathon I'm now like 3 legs behind, or like the final leg has just been announced, so I still need to do like 8, 9 and 10. But in principle 10 I've actually already read. Cat, don't... This is the sound of Fate is about to throw up. Anywho, there was a ton of drama over nothing because she didn't end up throwing up, but okay. I did finish the 10th leg already, but so I do still have to finish leg 8 and leg 9. But so yeah, let's just go over what I have read now. So I don't think I talked about this book yet, or did I? Because I did, right? I already ranted about this, I feel like. I did already talk about The Sun and the Void, right? Which was my leg 7 book. I did, right? Yeah, I think so. I already did. Otherwise I have to come back and film this clip. But I already did. So that means I actually only have 1 book to talk about because, yeah, progress has like been slow this week. But not really, it's just that, you know, I've been reading a ton of stuff together. And the one thing that I finished, sorry, my eye is like really leaking. How chaotic is this clip already turning out to be? But so I finished Defiant by Brandon Sanderson. So this is the 4th book in the Skyward series. In Skyward we are following humanity is like has had to escape Earth some point in the past, and they are now on a sort of like new planet which is called the Tridus, but it is kind of planet that they cannot escape from, and from time to time whenever they try to escape, for example, they are attacked by these beings that they refer to as, I want to say the Krell, but now I also feel like that is just a term I got from something completely different, so forget that if that is not correct. But so the protagonist of this series, Spensa, is basically a girl who has made it her life mission to become a fighter pilot and be able to join the galactic forces. However, her father used to be not a firefighter. Why can I not come up with this word? A fighter pilot, right? Her father used to be one, and he basically has been branded a coward and a traitor, all of after, you know, turning on his teammates in like his final mission. And so she is very much tainted by that image, and basically sees that, you know, everybody's kind of trying to keep her out of flight school because of that. Now, I enjoyed book 1 a lot. Book 1 I gave 5 stars to. Spencer is like a super annoying character, but somehow that first book really endeared her to me as well. And then the series kind of took a tumble down, you know. First book, second book, third book are very much sort of like repeats of the same formula, and what's really worked very well in book 1 is like the connections to other characters and true circumstances in book 2 and 3. It's not like we don't have that, but we have that with new characters instead of with the original cast that we met up in book 1. And so that has mainly impacted my enjoyment for book 2 and 3, but also book 3 really just didn't work for me at all. Book 3, I don't know whether it was just like the disappointment of doing that yet again, or whether there was more in play. I was also like listening to the audiobook, was listening to the UK version in which Mbots is like Scottish, which like really didn't work for me. So I don't fully remember the exact reasons why book 3 didn't. What is with this light? You know, then you think it is like a heat wave. Now is a perfect time for me to film because I finally have some light, some natural light on me, and then the light just keeps on changing every 5 seconds. So, I don't know whether it was, but book 3 really didn't work for me. I was really hesitant whether I wanted to even try and complete the series, but you know, like book 4 is going to be the final one, so I might as well. And I will definitely say that it was a return to goodness for me. I really enjoyed this one. I did give this, like, I think this one would be like a 4-star, for example. It didn't fully redeem the series to me because, you know, I still feel like that book 2 and 3 definitely had a lot of those flaws, or just like that repetitiveness of this pattern really didn't work for me. But reading book 4 also made me understand like that it was intentional, because we see her repeating the same patterns over and over again, and in book 4 we kind of address that finally, her sort of like tendency to go off on her own, for example, and stuff like that. So, you know, this one I really... Cats. This one I did really enjoy, and I really had a good time with it. It was easy to get through. I listened to this by audiobook again, but this time I listened to the US version. And so yeah, I enjoyed it. I definitely think it's worthwhile, but I don't think that I would say that, you know, it's worth like forcing yourself through book 2 and 3 just to get to book 4, for example. I think if you've made it through book 2 and 3 because of, you know, your own hopes and dreams for the series, then book 4 will probably be like a relief for you to read, because it definitely is like much better in my opinion than books 2 and definitely than book 3, which I absolutely despised, I remember. But yeah, that is what I've read so far. This one is going to count for leg 10, which is like a book series you want to see an adaptation for. Do I honestly need an adaptation for Skyward series? No, not necessarily, but I do think it would make a good adaptation. I do think that this would really work well as an adaptation, as like a series I would more like see it as. And it probably would do really well. We know that there is a adaptation for a Brandon Sanderson works in the making, or like in talks at least, but we don't know which one. So I'm also not breaking the rule, because you're not allowed to mention a series or a book that is already being adapted or adapted. But I do definitely think that this one has potential for adaptations, that it would work really well as a series. But so yeah, that's what I've read so far. I am in the middle of 3 other books at the moment, of which I only really expect to finish 1 still this month, but there are a few things that I might still start and finish, especially since I still need a book for leg 9, which is a book with water on the cover, which is none of my current reads have that. So I have to find something really, really short to fit it. And now I'm going to quit this clip because this light is absolutely bothering me and my cats are creating chaos. So I hope you enjoyed it. So it is the 1st of July, it is my birthday, and it's time to wrap up the month of June. So I did still finish a few things for the amazing readathon. So I finished leg 8, like egg. Thanks brain. Leg 8, which means that I finished Lost on Me by Veronica Raimo. This is a Italian book, it's a translated book. I chose this one for 5 colors on the cover. There is black, white, blue, yellow, and then there's of course many shades of grey, so that counts. This is a literary fiction, more or less. It is a book in which Veronica, it's more or less autofiction, and it is a book in which she basically goes through anecdotes of her childhood, and a lot of it is focused on her family. A lot of it is quite funny, but I feel like for me it just like dragged a little bit too long. And it is a short book, so I did enjoy it, and I did think that there were definitely some funny moments in it, but I also found myself, you know, because there isn't really a point to it, and the end of the book also talks about that, about the fact that there is no point to it, and that is kind of her preference and also her intention, but for me that just made it a sort of like, yeah, okay read. It was okay to go through, but it's not one that, you know, made me go like, oh wow, I had a great time, like it was amazing. I did have a good time with it, but that was more or less it, whereas I prefer my books to have a little bit more impact. But what I also enjoyed is the theming of it. A lot of it has to do with memory, especially towards the end of the book. A lot of it has to do with memory and sort of like the way we play with memory, and that the way that we remember things is sometimes the way that we've made ourselves remember things. You know, the way that we spun things that have happened in our past, to the extent that we sometimes no longer are sure about what actually happened, because we've told the same version of the story so many times that we kind of start to become convinced that that is the truth. Then for like 9 I read, so that was for Auckland, is a book with water on the cover. For that I read Weasels in the Attic by Hiroko, forgot the last name. So this is another translated book. This is one from Japanese. It's a very short one, and it's just like 70 pages, and it's basically like 3 sort of vignettes, 3 anecdotes that kind of form a bigger story as a whole. We follow the same sort of like main character, and he and his wife are happily married, but they want to have kids, and they haven't really been successful in just like trying to get them. But this isn't, while it is definitely I think it's definitely at the forefront to some extent of the theming that runs through these 3 stories. It is not like, the story isn't about them trying to conceive. We just have like, in the first one we have an encounter with a friend who, you know, like owns like a lot of exotic fish. The second one is with a mutual friend of that one who has moved over into the countryside and has problems with weasels in his attic. And then the third one is going back to that other friend with the weasels in the attic, who now has a baby at that point in time. There is some sort of like eerie atmosphere in there, and I almost felt like it was going to go sort of like the horror route, but it never really does. But it is quite unsettling in its atmosphere, I would say. But another one where it's like, you can take things out of it, and I think many people can have different experiences with this, but it's not like it has a clear-cut theming or a clear-cut sort of like point to it. So it's another one that was just sort of like middle of the road for me as a consequence. And then the final thing that I still finished for Amazing Readathon is the G-Dragon Tapestry, so the third one within this series. And so this is another 5-star just because, you know, they're cozy, wholesome, you know, perfect in what they do and manage and achieve their purpose very well. And so yeah, that's what I was able to finish throughout the month. I did also for Amazing Readathon count the Oleander Sword by Tasha Suri because I read more than half of it, so I was able to count that, but I will leave that for my July TBR. Not TBR, July wrap up. But so yeah, that is what I read in the month of June. So I read a total of 14 books, I think, or 13. One of those two, 14 I think, and yeah, that number on my TBR should have gone down, but it didn't because I also added 15 books to the TBR, so I added one more than I read, so we went up. But I do think in page count we probably went down, and I think like the TBR is kind of rejuvenated again. Like there's a lot of new stuff on there, of course, though I also read quite a few of the newer things on there as well, but because I was adding so much, I still have like 6 new things on the TBR that are left now. But so yeah, let's see whether next month I can contain myself more when it comes to purchases, at least, so that I can make some more progress. But so yeah, I'm ending it here. See you guys for the next one, and I'm off to film another video. Bye!